Good evening, everyone. I appreciate you guys coming out as always. Did anybody not get an index card? So I was giving out the index card, so if you've got any comments or questions about redistricting, we want to jot those down and you put your information on there so we can get it directly to them. And then they'll be able to see your comments and before the meeting that they have next week, 6 o'clock down here at the Bordeaux Library. I have not seen school board rep, Ms. Gentry. She's not texted me, but she was supposed to come and talk about the impact of it, redistricting on school board. Yes, next Thursday, the 28th, right here at Bordeaux Library. And then State Rep Dixie had a family emergency, so he's not able to make it, but they'll both, if not tonight, be at the meeting next week. She's supposed to. I've not heard back from her. As of Sunday was the last time we spoke and she was coming. Yeah, I was actually waiting on a response. That's what I was doing when we were talking. Yeah. So have you guys had a chance to go online and look at the maps? Robert has got them up here for us on the split screen. The first map, of course, is what it is right now. The map to the right is what it's proposed to be. A couple of things jump out really quickly. Part of Jolton that they're cutting out that's going to Goodlettsville, I believe. And I think one little piece that may be going to District 3, but I believe the majority is going to, that they're taking is going to Goodlettsville and 10. You can see it right across the top here on this side in the purple. The other thing that jumps out really quickly is when you come down the Kings Lane and Clarksville Highway area. There's a section cut out, it's almost a C shape. So up past Lloyd Road over to Whites Creek Pike, near Fontenelle and Cherry Grove, that would move into District 1. Haynes Park subdivision and part of Trepid Heights would move into District 2. So if you look around that section where you see Jordonia on this first map in blue, and then look at it on this side where the change is as it drops down. There's almost a C shape. They've cut out on Clarksville Highway, this Kroger's, the Kirk Youth About Business and Manna from Heaven strip, and Haynes Park going back up to Kings Lane on that side, one side of that street, and back over to West Hamilton and that would go to. That make sense? So if you were driving down Kings Lane, right-hand side would go to District 2, Haynes Park subdivision, go to 2. When you get on that backside near Hartman Park, now that would all be not just one side of Tucker Road and the park, those other two sides, West Hampton, the rest of Tucker Road, that would go into 2. Brent. So Haynes Park to Buena Vista, like going in the Mormon's Arm area, going down that way and back. So imagine if you turned on West Hamilton in front of Robert Lillard or Tucker in front of Robert Lillard, all of that on that side, that would go into 2. Yes. The planning department does it? Yes. That's what we're doing. See, they make a suggestion, and they've got different parameters that it's based on. Income levels, voting demographics, housing, population is the biggest piece. One of the things you guys kept hearing me talk about, how we were shrinking and our median age was going up, and talking about always how big District 1 was. Well, we physically just got larger. We are now a flat 100 square miles. The reason being is our population dropped 14%. We lost almost 1,000 residents just in the last couple of years, not even over the whole 10. Gary. Mm-hmm. Yes, so in this process, back to your point, you get community input after planning does this initial piece. They'll take the feedback from the community input over the next couple of weeks. The goal is for it to be on planning agenda in November, get to council, and then be passed through council by January. That's the timeline. Dr. Cummings? Mm-hmm. Yes. Absolutely. Um, several, several lawsuits. And we were having this conversation before the meeting because some of those outline factors that play into this are increases in poverty levels, decreases not just in population, but the impact. That's why I wanted Dr. Gentry here to talk about from the school standpoint. One of the things that we had jokingly talked about that wasn't funny though, we talked about how a lot of us hadn't had kids knock on the door to trick or treat in 10, 12, 15 years, that kind of thing. Well, one of the big drops in population from the last decade plus was the majority of school-age children and their parents that moved away. Part of where our population balanced out is because you have so many more multi-generational households where there's a grandparent, adult child, and grandchild in the same house. So you didn't increase in housing, but you may have added more people into a particular neighborhood. That map that you guys were looking at, it actually also, in terms of Clarksville Highway, instead of District 1 stopping at Fire Station 24 in Terrell Brody, it takes it on across the bridge. So basically, 90% of Clarksville Highway is already in District 1, and it just gives that last little bit from Terrell Brody Funeral Home and the fire station to the Welcome to Bordeaux sign just over the foot of the bridge. Ironically, we saw again progress being kind of looped out of that. That's problematic for a variety of reasons because you only have 3 stores in the district now. For a geographical space this size and a population even of this size, that's a problem. But it increases our population from just at 17,000 to just over 20,000. Doctor.
Thank you. The other thing that happens with redistricting and happens all every 10 years, 10 years, is increase in concentrations of poverty. And so it is important that Kroger is no longer in District 1 because then you have a district that does not have a general store. So usually a grocery store, something like that is kind of like your anchor, right? So you don't have that anchor. And it's interesting how what is going into District 2 because District 2 is a lot of redevelopment and a lot of that going down Buena Vista over to the right is going to be a second downtown. You know how you go to most cities, you see not just one downtown, but two downtowns? So that's what's going to be happening. We are carved out of all of that. And that's why we need a very strong council person who is there as a voice for this community. My brother here just asked me, he said, again, why don't we have the restaurants and everything? Well, you know, you go all the way back past Brenda Gilmore, and you know, they said because we don't have the rooftops. But every time rooftops want to come, we say no. Because now, because of the types of materials and all of that. But all of this is extremely important. It's going to also be important with our representation of who our congressperson is, who our state person is, who our senator is, all of this. So it's extremely political.
We've had all the conversations about Whites Creek High School. Now kids would have access or be sent, not because they're not changing zoning, but I believe it adds Pearl Cone to this cluster. So kids from here, if they were high school age, would have the opportunity to go to Whites Creek or to Pearl Cone. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Zach Deere. I actually started coming around because I was really trying to lobby to get Whites Creek combined into the same district. Was hoping it would be District 1, and most of this map I do like. One thing, I agree with what a lot of you are saying. I feel like that the Bordeaux slice needs to be added back into District 1. The reason that, the way that we started looking at the district is that we wanted something that would be more of a conservation district. We know there's a lot of flooding along Whites Creek, and so we thought if we could get, there are areas that have a lot more flooding than others, like near Hartman Park. There's one just south of Briley Parkway and Brick Church Pike that has constant flooding, and we want to partner with a lot of like groups that live in Whites Creek to do tree plantings and things like that to really protect that watershed. And so we want to actually have it included, not just for all the reasons you guys are saying, but because it also makes sense to really keep our tabs on that creek, because it's only going to get worse with climate change, and that creek is pretty dangerous. So FYI, thanks.
To the conservation point, one of the good things is District 1 already had the overwhelming majority of green space left in Davidson County. A couple years ago, they said it was 65% of the total urban canopy. So the parts that they added to Whites Creek but separated from Jolton didn't decrease that. They balanced that out. So we still have the overwhelming majority of green space, which allows us to still continue those conversations that we were having about trying to create some conservation overlay to certain these infill development and where they should be. Part of the confusion in this process too, it highlighted where in a lot of neighborhoods you have what's called neighborhood evolving in suburban neighborhoods, but you had a conservation area trapped between 2 or 3 or 4 subdivisions that were all neighborhood. Hand over here.
Councilman Hall, as an alumni and graduate of Whites Creek High School, I'm thoroughly and profoundly concerned about including the inclusion of Pearl Cone in District 1 and what is known as the Whites Creek Cluster. What is that going to do in terms of challenging the recruitment and enrollment at Whites Creek? As you well know, you have to have a certain number of students in a school to keep the school open. And if you're adding an additional school, additional high school, right, in the cluster, then that means persons are going to be able to pick and choose from 2 different high schools, and you already don't have a sufficient feeder school for Whites Creek. My grandfather, Robert E. Lillard, the school named after him was closed, which was a good feeder school for Whites Creek. That's gone. Haynes is supposed to be now the feeder school. Jolton's gone. Yeah, Pearl Cone. So what are we to make of this?
I'm glad you added the feeder piece, so because I was going to mention that. That's one reason why I'd invited Dr. Gentry to discuss that portion in particular, because in our conversations about how school choice has impacted the population overall and the growth, it's been a concern because we knew closing Jolton and Robert Lillard, direct feeders to Whites Creek for decades. There are several people in this room in most of this neighborhood who went through that process. From the 70s on, we were in that pipeline from Kings Lane, then Lillard, to either Alex Marine Old Center, Jolton, straight to Whites Creek. And so it led us into the conversation about vocation and other things and the need to add that back to Whites Creek and how that could help us in recruitment. But that's something you're going to have to really ask them about the logic behind that. The only component that I can tell you that factored into that I know is because there was a massive disproportion in a number of schools under certain school board reps. And Christian Book had double the schools that other school board reps had. And so part of that shift is to balance out and give some of those schools to other areas.
And I don't know, did and if, so
I thought the door was locked or something. You're okay. Well, can you text her and see if she's gonna make it? Okay. And there are a couple of other meetings, and that was the only reason even tonight, I was telling them I've got to shoot to one at 7:30 over in Madison. But that is a huge question and issue for us. It's not just about increasing the population, it's the type of population. And to Dr. Cummings' point earlier, the pushback that we've gotten on a lot of things about restaurants and business, because District 1 physically, again, is 3 to 8 times larger than every other district already, but we've got the least amount of businesses also. And so every business will tell you, you need more rooftops and you need to raise your median income. Us getting this commercial area along Clarksville Highway past the fire station, I think presents some great opportunity to clean those areas up and not have to do a lot to change and bring in new business, but it still doesn't account for how we increase the population enough to fill the schools back.
Okay, so in the past, I have been like very much against overlays because I just swore up and down that they devalued your property, blah, blah, but I've since changed my mind after hearing that areas like Belmead and Green Hills have overlays, and that's why you don't have, well, mostly let's just say Belmead, maybe some Brentwood. That's why you don't have all these little cookie clutter houses all over the neighborhood. And so I know a lot of people are worried about affordable housing, and we have some of the best built houses in the city, hands down. And I would hate for, there are already some ugly, tall skinnies popping up. Is there anything that you can do with the communities to start revisiting our zoning to keep our neighborhoods intact? I like the way our neighborhoods are laid out, and I don't think it's a matter of density. It's more so a matter of income, and you could kill 2 birds with 1 stone if you do not allow, because if you think about it, if you rezone a property and you put 6 or 7 houses on a lot that originally had 1 house, and you put $600,000 on each one of those houses, that already messes up what you would consider affordable housing. So would you consider getting with the community on the different areas? I mean, because like I said, I love the layout of our homes. It looks nice. And I'm seeing these ugly, tall, skinny slowly pop up on the outskirts, and they will be falling apart in 5 years, guaranteed. So what are your thoughts?
So in terms of creating diversity in housing stock, we still need to have the conversation as a community about having multifamily, because it's still the only area in the entire city that doesn't have any. It is a massive problem for us. Building material-wise specifically though, the state instituted new legislation. So what we've had to start doing at council is run dual legislation. If you wanted to rezone or build something today, depending on the number of units and where it was, going through the process, normally have conversations saying, "We want to be the driveway here, this, that, and other." Some of that you can still do, but per new state regulations, we have to run separate legislation to talk about materials, because at this level now, we're no longer able to tell a developer, you cannot use hardy board for that development. You cannot, we can't tell you, you have to do three-side brick. That kind of thing, we're having to run dual legislation where it says, this is the development itself. Is it approved? Yes or no? Okay. These are the materials they want to use. Is that approved? Yes or no? So you're having to do it twice for the same project. Coming to you, Randy.
Can you elaborate on that? And with respect to
Contextual overlays, well, most overlays in general are still going to be specifically applying a general or new layer of restrictions on top of the existing base zoning and what's included in that. But it does change a lot of overlays in that component, because several of them would include materials. So we've added new designation like to cut out short-term rentals. But this is going to force us to revisit in this next session, come the first of the year, how we're going to approach what the state is doing, because we had to adjust on the fly and just started literally creating two pieces of legislation for each development.
So theoretically, if pockets of District 1 wanted to do a contextual overlay, they would just have to run the corresponding legislation along with that.
Yes. Did you guys hear that question? So an overlay conversation, you'd have to have not just the conversation, the legislation for the overlay itself, but then separately for those materials, that component of it. Theoretically, it could be done. Hadn't been tried yet, but we'll see. It's part of the discussions, again, because we had to adjust on the fly in the last 60 days to what the state did. We've never seen something like that before. One of the other things in terms of redistricting that we're noticing about is along those same lines. Conversations around specific areas, the types of developments. You were talking about the tall and skinny. Architectural design, but if in theory someone did that design, but you could run dual legislation to say these are the building materials you could use for that, that changes the context of that scenario, right? So if you run into a developer or architect or someone who's interested in doing something, that would be a conversation at this level we still have. Somebody comes in and say, hey, I'm proposing development X. Okay, so here's what we want to see the development look like, and we know now you have to run these materials. Let's go ahead and get it on the record now, handle it, and also, and those legislators have to run the right. So if you get something rezoned, we have to defer item and circle back to them so that the other legislation can be written and add to it in the same.
I got mostly three comments. First off, ask you on something. What if you do if the county goes any reason to get one? That's a problem that will with you. I asked you on new case. It used to be so I agree with you. And secondly, you mentioned schools in the district. Schools, how do you the way the new district is going? That's all that to say. You know now how to there and with that I have a personal problem with what you want them to be cut and you know from the north it's going to be again and do the I think some of it goes into others as well. And the second thing is, I think the But specifically, you know, in the last redistricting, we got cut up where they come straight up Whites Creek Pike and turned and cut Jolton up, and people living across the street from each other in this district. No logical people, to be honest with you. And I understand majority, minority. I understand that. But my understanding that in our planning commission, how people convey it as well. But we can still maintain a majority minority district and not cut right there at the interstate.
So Jolton specifically, start with the school. From the conversations I've had, there is no in school. About foundation. Again, conversations it's population and tax base, because there was little to no support from their perception for Jolton Middle for a long period of time. And kids went from the elementary school, well, first they got the elementary school, then kids went from the elementary school out of the county to a private school or home school. And so the population began to decline at that middle school. And so I don't believe there's general, come on in, interest in them opening that back up. There's some conversations with private entities about what they'd like to do with it. Just like you saw at the meeting at Robert Lillard, they've got options of things that they'd like to do with those two schools in the interim. But directly in the last few days, there was no interest in reopening that school. It's also why I took the money for it out of the capital improvement budget. The second part, in terms of stopping at 24, a lot of that past 24 is either under conservation or it's one house for 2 acres, one house for 5 acres kind of combination. So they took the more rural components and put them to Goodlettsville on the end where it's primarily still rural.
Two things. First, I was at the meeting where they came and talked about Jolton Middle School, and they had a PowerPoint presentation, which I happen to have a copy of. The very first item on that PowerPoint was keeping it open as a K through 8. That was their recommendation. We had a, pardon?
They knew going into that meeting that that had been a concern. Conversation around Jolton Middle and Whites Creek.
So they told us what they wanted us to hear, not what they thought, not what they thought should be done with it. That brings me to some of my next questions. Let me go back first and talk about the redistricting. On the south side of I-24, I can show you where there's a lot of acreage, a whole lot of acreage, more than what's on the north side, other than one specific piece of property that's got like 100 acres. But the rest of them are, you know, 1-2 acres. But that aside, I looked at some of the posts on the website, and what I find amazing is in the budget, they're talking about putting awnings over the sidewalks at Robert E. Little Elementary, and that school is closed. So this budget doesn't mean anything.
No, that was from the last 2 years.
Well, it says 2022, and it also says 2025. Yeah. So where did we get the new updated version? It'll be up after they've done it.
No.
Okay. And another question is they.
What they want on that list to stay or come out, and if they've gone through and had it evaluated, add something completely new to it. And then they'll go through the process. Maybe some of it will get done through the CSP amendment
after it's done. All right, then the next question here, they're talking about, the allocated funds for a police precinct in Jordan. So is that gonna be where the middle school's at? So none of these things are actually been budgeted. Yeah, well, let me say this, that didn't happen at the Jordan Middle School, because they come back after the school's closed and replaced the bleachers. Yeah. Well, the sidewalks I can see, but replacing the bleachers at a closed school, they should have recalled that money.
I wish we could. And one thing you guys know, out of a $3 billion budget, by charter, we cut a check to MNPS, but once we cut that check, we have zero say in how it's spent, zero clawback. We have no control whatsoever of the money after we write the check. And by law, they get half the budget before we do anything else.
Okay, I have two questions. The first, as far as, and I know you've been getting lots of feedback on the redistricting, and you and your peers will be voting on the final. What is the consensus about what it will really look like from what you're hearing? Because I'm sure you all have had some discussion about it amongst each other. What does it really look like? And then the second question is, I've looked at those budgets that what Gary's talking about, and from looking at it, to me, it almost appears as if it's a smoke screen for nothing. It's a promise of something that never happens. I even looked at the dates of things, not scheduled to start to the year 2029. And I'm like, oh, this is never going to happen. So exactly, what are we getting now? What exactly is going to actually happen other than a few street sweepings? Because I don't really see where we're getting anything.
So the more accurate budget to look at is when the mayor does his capital spending plan, what he pulls from the capital improvement. We finally this year have done away with something that in practice in the past was, and we call it putting a thumb on the scale a little bit, but planning would rate those requests along with the mayor's office from different areas and prioritize them. And you could get points and trade points between council members on different things to try to get something done. I'll give you an example, like a turning lane that's been asked for forever because of a lot of car accidents. May only cost $250,000, but then another district got a project for $3 million approved. No longer can you wait the process that way. So it's capital improvement budget that he was reading from. You put in as many things as possible. And you guys heard me mention this in all the participatory budget meetings. What you ask for in that list should qualify for that list for participatory budgeting. But if it doesn't get done, we'll take those same things from the participatory budgeting site that were put in, and we'll add them to that CIB. So part of what you'll see, like the first week of November, stuff that I've already seen go in as requests for participatory budgeting, we'll take some of that and add it to the CIB also. You have to put it out there 2, 3, 4 times so that the mayor's office has to be able to include it or account for it. You guys know budget time is all about horse trading between the administration and the council, and typically, you know, the mayor's office puts out a budget, then the budget chair puts out a budget. Council members fight over the budget from the budget chair, and if they can't agree on it, then the mayor's budget is what goes into effect. So specifically, go ahead. So specifically, when you see the new CIB request, I can tell you that I know from that list, the pumping station for Jolton is supposed to go into effect this year. It's been in the last 3 years. Now that money's been allocated, they've even worked out some participation agreements with some folks that are trying to develop there. Most of the road projects that were in there or that were asked for before, a lot of the sewer projects, things of that nature, are things that we were able to get done during the last 18 months during COVID. Some of the other parts of those things were done because when money was reallocated from that bridge downtown, we were able to take that money that was divided up between a few districts, get some of those projects done. Right now, major stuff that you see, they won't decide on a lot of it until there's a final draft on redistricting, because then they'll know which district some of those projects were in. So for example, there are some road projects in that West Hamilton Tucker Road area, just simple paving stuff. Now it would be listed as far as in District 2 if the map stayed the way it is. And so they'd allocate those funds that way and look at that district as part of what they were doing. So it would move from my CIB to somebody else's, or from the CSP listed as 1 to 2. So it's just some mobility issues that we're facing, but come November, we'll have a better out view of how most of that's going to be laid out. Hold on, Miss Gina. That's right, Ian. I'm sorry. Let me come back, Miss Gina.
So the participatory budget process initially just sort of rubbed me the wrong way anyway, because they kind of said, here's $2 million for you to share between 5 districts. What are your problems? And so the context for the conversation for the community coming into that conversation was, if you had $2 million to spend in your district, how would you do it? Now, you just said that the results of all those things that we put down on that participatory budget process for the $2 million is going to go into the capital improvements budget, but no one was thinking about like the $5 million and $10 million projects during this participatory budget process. And it seems to me like I went to the Lillard School meeting and learned that it was going to be $20 million just to make that into a usable school. So it seems sort of like a little slap in the face to say, here's $2 million to, you know, to spend discretionarily or however you'd want to do it. I guess what I want to address is, how are we going to get the needs, those larger needs, the more substantial needs of the community put into that budget? Like, what process do you have to get that community input? Because when you ask the community for ideas to how to spend $2 million, that's a very different conversation than what do we need to get done, and let's make sure that that gets in the budget. Doesn't matter what it costs, let's try and make it happen.
Right, and I think everybody in the room agrees with you on that. And you've seen and heard me publicly challenge that process from the onset. It was horrible. I asked for 10 just for District 1. It got whittled down to 2, and the irony is the 2 was originally supposed to be for 1. And then the mayor decided he was going to divide that $2 million between North Nashville and Bordeaux, because we've been struggling with this conversation for about a decade now. Everybody outside of the areas wanted to include Bordeaux and North Nashville together. It has never been that way. This side of the MLK Bridge was Bordeaux. The other side was North Nashville. That conversation has been so convoluted, and with the push to take West Trinity Lane and make it a competing downtown, whenever you turn on the news and you hear about an accident, a crime or something, It could be in Bordeaux, but they say North Nashville because they were prepping people mentally for what they were attempting to do. It's fully intentional. Part of the other elephant in the room, and back to Dr. Cummings mentioned about some of the lawsuits that will inevitably come from this process, you have to look at the fact that, and we have to, well, I'll make an attempt to be politically correct, but it's not gonna sound like very politically correct. I mentioned this again before the meeting started. 14,000 black people have left Davidson County since 2009. In 2011, just after the last census tract, you had 7 out of 35 council districts that were majority black or brown. Today it's 3, and it's barely 3. Part of what they are taking into account with redistricting is how to take the last few minorities in the city and disperse them equally over several areas. I'll give you an example. If you looked at those maps and you saw District 5, East Nashville, it went from about 91% African American a decade ago to 38. District 2 next door went from 93 to 68 today. It's that way all over the city. And so, to not change voting and demographics in certain ways, they have to take a lens into account when they're reading the lines. The irony in our conversations around workforce housing too, I mentioned almost 70% in the city now for housing. Again, was at the point where all market is closing, and the workforce is what you would see between 35 and 75,000.
Thank you. I had just touched bases with her, and she said she was unaware, but she was here this way. Thank you for writing.
Another one asking about Jolt and Middle. So you want to touch on those? Gary, you want to do Jolt and Middle again? And then
Yeah, on the Jolt Middle School, there's a police precinct in his wish list.
they said they want to see you. Can you come this way?
I don't have on a mask, so.
Don't breathe on me. There it is. The question is, under Councilman's capital improvement budget wish list, it shows that moving a police precinct to Jolton. And so my question is the middle school intended to be used for a police precinct or something else? Have y'all made a decision on it? Oh, yeah.
Discussed at the Jolton community meeting a couple of weeks ago, where you were present. So no decision has been made about using Jolton Middle School for anything. The purpose of that meeting was to gather input from the community about what they would like to see, similar to the meeting that we held at Lillard prior to the one in Jolton. So no decision has been made about what we'll be doing with Jolton Middle School.
Good evening, Dr. Gentry. Good to see you. I had a question earlier about, it's my understanding that Pearl Cone is being mentioned in terms of being in the same district now that Whites Creek High School will be in. And that being the case, Robert E. Lillard has been closed as a feeder school for Whites Creek. Jolton is closed as a feeder. Haynes is now a feeder, but now you've got competing schools, competing high schools. You've got Pearl Cone and Whites Creek now. So if you do not have enough enrollment at Whites Creek, it's likely that that school could in fact shut down because you've got to have a certain amount of students, as I understand enrollment. So how do you handle the problem then of recruitment supplying for students for Whites Creek?
I'm always concerned when questions imply a problem that has not been articulated. The feeder patterns for the schools do not change. What this was is an attempt to balance the responsibilities among the school board members, was one of the things that was requested. Christian Bugs had 40 schools in her district. We had some school districts that have less than 10. So this was really an attempt to balance the representation for the school districts. The feeder patterns for the schools are not impacted. And so let's also be clear about another thing. And so the second part of your question is quasi-valid. Feeder patterns are not really determined by schools. Feeder patterns are not impacted by the number of schools you have. They're impacted by the number of students you have in the schools, right? So we did not reduce the number of students that we have that are available to matriculate from one school to the other. We just consolidated them into the same physical location. The number of students who get to choose Whites Creek has not decreased. The feeder pattern into Pearl Cone has not changed. It's just the school board representation for Pearl Cone, okay? So we did not create a problem by now saying, Haynes, you can choose Whites Creek or Pearl Cone. The feeder patterns are the same. I can hear you. Go ahead, I'll repeat your question.
Yeah, it's just because it's being recorded and we have to.
Thanks, Dr. Jennifer, for that clarity. My concern, I guess, is having said that, my concern would be if you have a Pearl Cone and a Whites Creek, two high schools in the same district, is that true? Is that kind of situation, happening in other districts? Number one, and then number two, if you've got a Pearl Cone and a Whites Creek, and you're not impacting, say, the feeder schools and that type of thing, that's a great thing. But you still have people picking and choosing between two schools is in the same district. How does that, is that a good thing, or is that something that Whites Creek needs to be concerned about?
Hello?
Are you okay with this? Okay. So I'll tell you a couple of things. Number one, we're not the only district that has two high schools. Never has been. There have always been districts that had more than one. We had districts that had 3 high schools. So it's never been the issue. Again, the feeder patterns don't change. And students have always been able to choose based on the academies, right? If I'm in a district that doesn't offer, if I really wanted to do music business and I wasn't in the district with Pearl Cone, I could always request that exception to go to Pearl Cone because I'm interested in business music. So, or music, however order that goes. So that's, we have not created a problem or a scenario that has not always existed. The challenge is many times our students don't take advantage of the options that they have. They're either challenged by transportation, which is a bigger conversation that needs to be had about this city. They're challenged about having to go to work and go to school, which is a bigger conversation about this city. And so the school having options is never a bad thing for families. The inability to take advantage of those options is the challenge. Whites Creek is a unique entity in this city that needs not concern, but more advocacy for attendance. So I think one of the roles that your organization can play is to continue to highlight the unique situation that Whites Creek is in. There's a college on Whites Creek's campus that students can graduate with a high school diploma and an associate's degree at the same time, and certifications because of the academies that are there. The new academy that we're building that will continue to pay homage to your grandfather, Judge Lillard. So, so I don't think it's an issue to be concerned about. I think the school itself doesn't move, the feeder patterns don't move, and the programming hasn't changed.
Hi.
My question was, you said that there was no decision on Jolton. Has there been a decision on Lillard?
No.
And if not, have you, the possibilities that you all were entertaining, have you whittled those down? And what are those options?
Yeah, so the answer to the first two questions is no. I just received the typed up or scanned in people who attended that meeting, so their email addresses. The next step that I think was requested and it was agreed upon, that we would go back to Lillard, take those top interest ideas, open up the classrooms and allow people to just do a deeper dive into what those options are. We really want it to be a decision that this community can support and get behind. We know that time is not really on our side for this, and not because anybody else is going to make a decision to do something with the building. We just don't want the property to continue to sit empty. And so the next step is, now that we've gotten all of those cards and contact information consolidated, is to reach back out to all those people who expressed an interest to be a part in continuing the conversation. The other request that was made was to take a look across the country. We're not the only school district that's had to make this decision. And so to take a look across the country about how other districts are leveraging these buildings, this property that they now have available. The majority of them that I have seen, that either leasing it out to charter schools, which is not, I don't think, what we want to see in District 1. We've got a lot of charter schools already, and that's the concern you should have if that becomes the option, about whittling down and impacting enrollment in our schools more than anything else. And so the other options I've seen is then giving it to developers for other things, which becomes another problem altogether. Then you get into a rezoning issue, and that's not a fight that you want to have, and that's not what you want to see in I don't think we want to see in District 1. The challenge becomes, District 1 is probably the only place, and Councilman Hall has said this to you probably several times, there's no place else for people to go. And people continue to come to District 1 for the land that's available here, but they're not bringing to District 1 the things that start to uplift the community and will bring into this area the things that I believe we want to see. So that's where the voice and the advocacy also needs to continue to be focused. We got to pay attention. The council has conversations constantly about what to do with the land in District 1. The mayor has conversations constantly about options for what goes and what gets built and what gets stood up here in District 1. And you just have to we have to be really cognizant of what the long-term effects of whatever those developments are. If it's housing, if it's a community center, if it's some other business coming here, is it something that's going to continue to advocate and allow your quality of life to be the quality of life you want to have? Most of the people that I know that are in District 1 are not looking to leave. But the challenge is we have that our children are not looking to stay, because the things that are important to their quality of life are not the things that people are looking to place in District 1. And so we've got to be really paying attention to those kinds of things. And so when we think about a Lillard and when we think about a Jolton, what are the things that are going to contribute to the quality of the life of those people who have decided, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to raise my children. And so, you know, we've got homes for sale that don't look anything like the sticker price when we bought the houses that we're living in. And the people moving in are not the same people that are bringing families and children into the district. And so things are changing. And so we've got to figure out how to be a better part of the change and be a better advocates for what that change looks like and what it sounds like and what it feels like.
So, may I ask you a question? And to the gentleman that asked the question about the two high schools in the same district, in District 1, I think it's very exciting. I think it's very exciting to have two high schools in the same district. They compete against each other. But if you're not meeting the program needs of the community, why would I bring my child to your school? What are you doing at Whites Creek to make it as exciting as the Pearl Cone Magnet School program in their studio program and in their music classes and things that our kids love music? So what is Whites Creek doing? What are they, how are they meeting the needs? You talked about the different academies that Whites Creek is offering. Well, we, as Haynes Park, we don't know about that. No. Has Whites Creek been marketing? Is the school actively coming out? Come and meet with our neighborhood group. Have the principal and the teachers come to our neighborhood meeting and talk to us so we can get the word out to the community of what Whites Creek is offering that's exciting, that's motivational, that's educational, that will help our kids go on and do high school and college simultaneously, that will help them get a better career opportunity. But if we don't know, how can we advocate for it? How are you coming to us as a community group, as a school board representative, and how are you promoting the principals and the teachers to say, y'all got to get out there, and y'all got to talk to the community, and y'all got to come and meet with the community, because they just don't know. So, and that's everything with the community. The neighbor is the customer. Everybody wants the neighbor to promote this, to promote neighbor to vote for this. But guess what? Nobody is coming out, and I know because of COVID, we can't, we have to be careful. But at the same time, there is no marketing. What is the programming needs? The Y is getting ready to introduce a very exciting thing with Blue Cross Blue Shield, A Healthy Place. But that is something that they looked at, I guess, the program needs of the community, and saw what needed to be done. But what else, and what other entity are looking at what the community wants? How are you talking to the neighbor? Y'all not going out to the neighbor. Y'all want to get in political office. You want us to vote for you, but you do nothing for us. And we're sick of it.
So,
Do something for us, and we'll back you.
so for the future political candidates in the room, and those of you, again, I want to remind you that we did have the meetings at Lillard. We continue to have the meetings at Lillard. We will continue to have the meetings at Lillard. But we need you to come prepared for conversation and planning. We do not want the school system to decide what happens with Lillard. The amazing things that are happening at Whites Creek, the principal, I know, at least I've been told, has done, I think, a really good job of visiting and going out and highlighting what's going on there. We've had press conferences to talk about our partnership with Pinnacle Bank over there at Whites Creek, who is actually covering the cost of tuition for 40+ students to go through the, the Nashville State dual education program with Nashville State. Pinnacle Bank is actually footing the bill for all of those students to cover the cost of that, so it doesn't have to come out of the school's budget. Nashville State Community College has put a campus of that, so that those students don't have to travel to get those courses and get that dual degree. So there are great things happening at Whites Creek. Dr. Mells is probably one of the most excited and energetic principals I've seen in a very, very long time. That's super excited to work with not only the Alumni Association, but any parent, any community member that wants to support the work that he's doing. And I say that again, that's willing to support the work that he's doing. Principals cannot always create programming that's going to meet the needs of every citizen in the area. His challenge and his job was to create programming that would allow students the opportunity and get them excited about choosing Whites Creek for their 4-year high school degree, knowing that they could leave with this 2-year associate's degree at the same time. And I think he's done a wonderful job of that. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, and one of the things I have realized even with planning these community meetings is that working with MNPS and understanding where their distribution and their communications are going. I've had people to reach out to me like, I don't get those emails, well, because I don't have kids or I don't have this. So we've got to figure out a better way to get everyone connected. One of the things we did do is reach out to the mayor's office of, I think it's the mayor's office of neighborhoods, to get sort of the contact names for community organizations, and I have provided those to MNPS to start to broaden that communication space as well.
Works. The problem is that you started too late. The school shut down, and that's when the conversation started. I even tried to get you to have a meeting before they shut down because I told you I was hearing rumors that they were going to shut down. Every school I mentioned closed except Whites Creek. So you started it afterwards, and then the thing about it, Alex Green, they have pods, trailers, I guess, outside the school where the kids have to do their work. The kids in our community shouldn't have to be learning out of trailers. When you've got Hillwood, Hillsborough High, they're living in luxury over there with their schools, with everything those kids need, new computers, everything, but then the old ones get sent to the kids over here. There's a Tennessean article that talks about if you live in a rural community or you're Black, you're probably not going to get a good education. You're not even ready for college, which means you will not probably graduate. So it said that the key to solving that problem is to pump more funding into those schools. Money. There's a school in East Nashville. They're saying it did a turnaround because more resources went to that school. But at the Jolting meeting, I left there thinking that you weren't going to advocate for schools that are supposedly don't have enough students. If there are 5 students at the school, those kids deserve to get top-notch education. So how much are you advocating on the school board to say, my district needs this, you've got this for decades, we need this money, I'm not gonna vote for your school to get anything else until my district gets what they need, because the research is there. If you don't fund the schools, they keep declining and declining and declining. Nobody's gonna send their kid to underperforming school if they can do better. That's why the parents are running to charter schools whether they're performing or not, because in their head, they're thinking that their children are getting a better education than in minority communities. That's why people move to a community, because of the schools. So it's hard to get people to move to the community if they're looking at the schools and saying, 4 schools shut down in 1 district? Something's wrong with that neighborhood. So, I mean, you're gonna have to take responsibility. Parents have to take responsibility for their children. But as an elected representative in a paid position, you're going to have to start vocally standing up for this community and tell the other school board reps, I'm sorry, I've done enough, you're on your own, you're gonna have to start supporting me. And I mean, I don't know what more to say.
So it's very, if we're talking about, I mean, the specific instance about Hillsborough, Hillwood, and their money, capital dollars versus operating dollars, but that's a whole different conversation. So I'll go ahead and tell you, I said, yeah, you're right, that our neighborhoods are challenged when it comes to keeping students in schools. They're challenged with getting infrastructure and supports that we need. We're challenged with getting all other metro services and supports that we need. Our districts are challenged. And our schools are challenged because the challenges for our community that continue to go unaddressed manifest themselves in our classroom. And so it's easy to say, give the schools everything that they need. That pie is not that big. The pie rarely grows. This is the first time that the pie has grown, and you know where the majority of that growth went to, rightly so, to teacher salaries. And so we've got to, I don't even know how many more times and how many different ways to say this, is, you know, and people like to use the Laughlin situation as an example. When parents decided that Laughlin was going to be their school of choice, parents made Laughlin their school of choice, and they supported Laughlin. They were in Laughlin. I've got schools in District 1 that can't even get a PTA because we can't get a parent that wants to spend the time and lead a PTA. I get it. I'm not saying that there's not a reason for it, but the point being, when there's not a PTA and other organizations that show that support, it's a problem. It becomes a problem. I'm not saying it's easy. I just finished my last conference call at work. It is not easy. And then when I leave here, I gotta go pick up a kid from dance class. And then I gotta get her fed. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's not easy, that it's easy. I'm saying that it's an unfortunate reality that we are continually challenged with non-academic problems that manifest themselves in academic problems. And so the conversation has to get bigger, is the only thing I'm continuing to say. So for whoever sits here and represents School Board District 1 in a couple of years, the conversation has to be bigger. Because sitting there and saying that District 1 should get X number of capital dollars, when the majority of the council people aren't funneling those capital dollars to District 1? That's where the problem is. We can ask for money all day long. Our capital needs report clearly said, year after year after year, what Robert E. Lillard needed to get repaired. It was clear. We ask, we don't approve. Yeah, oh, I don't pick the council people, but that's my point. We ask. The capital needs request for Robert E. Lillard was on the budget year after year after year. But when the decision was made about the capital needs budget, who did they give the money to? They gave the money, with the capital needs dollars, they don't just approve the dollars, they approve them and tell us what to do with them. It wasn't say, okay, you asked for 10 million, here's your 10 million, do what you need to do. Yeah, you asked for 10 million, we're only gonna give you 3, and with this 3, this is what you need to do with it. That is what happens year after year with our capital needs budget. We never get a fully funded one. They pick and choose what projects off of there that we can use the limited dollars they give us for. And they use the limited dollars to keep the Hillwood project alive.
It's actually an administrative thing, and this didn't pass in the buck. Here's how this happens. Again, per charter, we're required to give a certain percentage of the overall budget to MNPS. But again, we have no say in the day-to-day operating of that. When you get anything additional, the mayor can say, I'd like X amount of money to go to this or to that, which I mentioned earlier about weighting the scale, weighing in on a conversation and influencing that conversation. But in terms of council votes, both Ms. Gina and everybody else is right at the same time. One, it's whether it's schools, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's development, regardless of what it is, it can be landfill conversation, right? Getting another area to take something that they've traditionally been able to force you to take means trying to change the mind of a lot of people to say, I'll take it and take the burden off of you. That doesn't happen voluntarily or very often at all. More importantly, you've got to get an administration in that's actually committed to something beyond a campaign. You just had a historic vote and got a new mayor who said, we're going to invest in neighborhoods, put out a whole document about neighborhoods. I literally mentioned at the last community meeting, the second meeting I ever stood in council, I said, at some point the budget's got to reflect the priorities of the people. Nashville is more than downtown. That's yet to happen because people have been allowed to weight the scale one way or the other. But specifically, we can do a request. You heard Gary mention what I had in the CIB, asking for money from the administration, from the capital spending to do stuff at those schools. Look at the date on some of those, right? Some of the repair stuff in those things like awnings and speed bumps and whatnot at Lillard and other places, that was put in years ago and gets put in every year, hoping that they'll pick it and add it to the capital spending plan. What every administration does is pit MNPS and council against one another. But legally, we don't have any say in how money gets spent once we cut the check. There you go. Listen, we can do that immediately because here's one of the ideas that I've been discussing for the last couple of years, but was shot down. When we were in the midst of all the conversation about community oversight, I said, let's do community oversight for education. So it's not just a conversation that happens during budget time. It's where you're actively every month, school board rep, council members, mayor's office, state rep, because the state is the other elephant in the room. She can ask for all kinds of things But there's a state formula and a state decision that says this is how much money goes to Nashville overall and how we're gonna prioritize that money. And oh yeah, FYI, the better downtown Nashville does, the less money the state sends to MNPS. It is the most insane formula and process, but there has to be more communication on a monthly, weekly, however basis, so that these issues aren't something that comes up. As to Ms. Donegan's point, we were hearing 2 years before Lillard closed because it was on the priority list, and we were saying, hey, how do we get more resources to Lillard? It's on the priority list. We were hearing 2 years before it closed that it was closed, and we were having the conversation about it. And then we were surprised when it actually happened because we had been having those conversations. So it's a double-edged sword, but we can do that anytime. I would love for 50, 60 people to get together and say, hey, today, guess where we're going? We scheduled a meeting to go to the mayor's office. And if you don't get the meeting with the mayor's office and they give you somebody else in the mayor's office, guess what? Show up anyway. Show up that day, show up the next day, show up the next week. They will answer the door eventually.
Yes. The word is strategic. Absolutely. And so let me clarify my point because I don't think my point got addressed. My point is very simple. Councilman Hall says he doesn't know, we have no control over how funds get allocated. When we submit a budget, it is a line item budget. So the council knows very clearly what it is we intend to do with those dollars. It says teacher salaries, it says books, it says technology. It is very clear about what we're going to do with those dollars. And we don't, if we ever have to change direction, it takes place on a board meeting floor. So there is no asking for one thing for A and turning around and spending it on C. Okay, that does not happen. So please do not leave here thinking that people don't know what happens with the money. The second thing, my point was around the capital dollars, 2 separate budgets, 2 separate approval processes. And our capital needs budget has been in the tens of millions repeatedly, at least for the past 14 years. And we've never gotten all the money we needed for capital improvements. And so and my point is, and it remains, in spite of what was just said, when I ask for 10 million, if I only get 3, I get the 3, and I'm told specifically by the council, I'm told specifically what I can do with the dollars that I was given.
Okay.
With capital dollars, they do. Because it's always a treat. Yeah, so the board approved the spending. The board approved it. The board approved it. But it didn't get fully, even that project didn't get fully funded.
And I think part of what she's talking about too is the several meetings we had over the last summer. State Rep Love and Ms. Buggs came, and that was one of the things that they talked about, almost even to the point that it was yeah, we probably shouldn't have done that kind of thing. She alluded to if we had to do it over.
If we had to do it over, no, we would not have. We would not have. At the point as it was presented, it cost 10 million. We've already spent 8. What are we going to do? So, if you're looking for the perfect politician, I'm sorry I showed up.
So I even asked Ms. Buggs, I said, how can you, it was at the Bordeaux Library, I said, how can you justify sending all that money to those 2 schools and you got kids over here with faulty equipment? And she said, what do you do when you have 600 parents screaming about their kids going to a school that's not up to par? And I'm literally looking at her like, is she for real? And I literally was almost speechless, and that's very rare for me. But I thought, I know she didn't just say, I'm going to give money to the affluent children, but children that I know have obstacles, I'm just going to not do it even though I know they need it.
Yeah, so
it's
let's
not like
be
you
clear.
need
The
600
funds
parents.
for Robert E. Lee, that's all one approval. It wasn't a line item approval. It was all, we approved the capital needs budget, which included Lillard. It all did not get funded. And so again, I continue to remind you, we asked for 30, they gave us 5, I'm making up numbers, and here's what I want you to do with the 5, okay? So let's go, and because I love the question that I'm sorry, you go ahead, you've asked, like, you had your hand up.
No, go ahead, I'm gonna pick up after.
About strategy. And that's what tends to happen, right? So when the 600 parents show up, we've got to be the 600 parents. And I've heard mayors, I have had mayors, and I know you know this, I have had mayors to particularly flat out say, well, 37208 don't vote. They look, trust me, this is what they do. I watch this man open the drawer, pull out the voting results. Well, yeah, no, I didn't give XYZ to 37208 or 37218, because when I look at who supports me, I've got to return that favor. This is unfortunately how it works. When they look at the 4 years, the 2 years or 4 years that they're sitting in that seat, they are paying back favors to the communities that supported them the most. Is it right? We do believe, we want to believe that we've elected a mayor or whatever that's representing the entire of the city, the entire of their district. It does not happen. And it sucks. Oh, I'm in.
So, Dr. Gentry, okay, number one, with the strategy for communications, there is a problem with the office to where only text messages come to those who may have kids enrolled.
Some people get emails, some people get call outs.
Right.
Yeah.
And even on the website, they had your email address wrong.
Yeah.
So relay that message to Dr. Battle, because she can fix that. That's one. Number two, could you enlighten us on what we should be advocating for right now as the governor convenes to revisit the formula for funding schools? Because now is the time that we have to carpet bomb capital.
Yeah.
So please speak to that.
Yeah, so those of you who may or may not know, the governor has called, there's 3 things going on that you need to be aware of. Number one, there's a special session going on right now talking about vaccine requirements, right? The second thing is that there's a special, what he's talking about is the thing in the middle. The third thing, the first thing is the vaccine special session. The third thing I want you to know is that next week, there's another special session convening to make school board races partisan. Yeah, so that's the thing that's on the agenda for next week. Yeah, to next week. So, and you can help me out with this. I don't know if that means there'll be 2 candidates, that will have primaries now. We can't get people to come and vote the one time for school board. So now what we're doing, we are impacting the representation for communities like ours. Because now you got to get people to come out more than one time. Part of the voter suppression. We're going to have people coming out more than one time, if that's how it's going to work, because it's partisan. If that passes, and the word on the street is that it has a good chance it's going to pass, because we're only one of 4 urban districts in this state. Yeah. And so that's what's on the thing. The thing in the middle is what you're asking about. So the district filed a lawsuit against the governor, along with Shelby County, and one of the others, they did their own, but we were joint with Shelby County in Memphis to have the governor, the legislature, to revisit the funding formula, and Councilman Hall referenced this a few minutes ago. There's an equation somewhere that the state came up with, and they plug in all the data that formula as it says today, and it says, oh, making up numbers here, we owe Davidson County $100 million. I don't want to give them $100 million. So I'm going to give them 70 and hope the property taxes take up the slack for the rest. The point being, the formula that they created that churns out a number for them to budget, they have never honored that formula. Second part of the problem is the formula that exists today, even if fully funded, doesn't address the needs of Davidson County or most urban districts. So the 2 things that are supposed to be happening, they've asked us, and plus I'm not supposed to say that, it was in a special executive session. Hypothetically speaking, we could pause the lawsuit and hope that they convene a committee that has a voice on it that would advocate for what urban districts truly need to see in a funding formula. Or we could go ahead with the lawsuit and not have a voice at the table. So this is the thing, I think, where we sometimes say, well, we should just fight for what we want. But hear what I'm saying. We can continue to say, well, I'm gonna sue him anyway, and say, fine. Think about the January 6th commission. He can say, well, if you're gonna keep suing me, I'm gonna make sure that there's nobody on this committee that's reviewing the funding formula that gives a squat about what's going on in Davidson County.
Yeah.
So, and it's the same thing, like knocking on the mayor's door, you have a driver's license that gets you into the state capitol. And they're not gonna wanna see you, but go anyway. Go anyway, because this whole game assumes that people like us don't pay attention. The whole thing that happens in federal, state government assumes it, they bank on it, that we're gonna fight we're gonna continue to fight, and I'm not saying, please don't misunderstand what I'm saying, that we're gonna continue to fight over the Joltons and the Lillards while they do the things that they're doing. I'm not saying Jolton and Lillard are unimportant, but they're counting on the fact that we're gonna be so mad at each other and so riled up about Jolton and Lillard that while they're over there bird dogging the funding formula, while they're over there making school board races partisan, while they're over there doing everything else to silence us and limit our ability to advocate for ourselves, and then we're gonna come up bruised and bloody because we didn't beat each other to death.
Yeah.
Well, there's gonna be a lot to show for it. We just didn't have anything to do with it.
Let me
The whole world will have changed around us.
let me first of all say something about your comments and yours. As far as the state goes, there's no such thing as a minority voice. They get you on a committee and tell you got a voice, and then what they do what they want to do, and then they turn around and say, well, they had a voice on the board, or they had a voice. In reality, they railroad you. I've had it done to me, I know, trust me. But let me go back to Jolton for a moment. You're right, I was at that meeting, and at that meeting, you and the board and the staff made a PowerPoint presentation, and on the first issue on that PowerPoint presentation on the offer to the community was to keep Jolton Middle as a K through 8. And then you had other options as well. So I would ask you this, do you and other board members have any real interest in that happening, in Jolton becoming a K through 8?
If Jolton has interest in that school, that campus, right? Beautiful campus, 2 buildings right next to each other. And I said this at the meeting. What my first ask was, and I don't get to make this decision, it was kind of facetious, but I really would have been excited if it had happened, if we could have made the elementary principal the principal over both those schools. I don't know anything about making principals, so it probably was a crazy idea, but it just made sense to me, right? It would have been wonderful. We've got to have bodies. We just got to have the commitment that says, if we can make this grow it grade by grade, so we've already put the 5th back in the elementary, we got to grow it grade by grade. And I don't know how we prove that we're able to do that. I don't know whether that's doing it like we do colleges and they sign up for it so many months before to commit that this is where we're going to be, but we've got to prove that we can fill the seats. We talk about schools being underfunded. Here's the deal. I'm at Lillard. I've got a full school. I don't like what's happening with Lillard. A charter school open, so 15 students leave. That's 15 times $9,000 that comes out of that principal's budget. Flat, no questions asked. The money follows the student. So then I got a little less money, a significant lot less money as a principal to do what needs to be done. The problem with our schools, especially in this district, is that the needs don't diminish just because the students leave. Hear me. The needs in that building do not diminish just because 15, 20, 30 students leave. I've got all the problems that still come with poverty. I got all the problems that still come from students being on medication. I've got all the problems that still come with students and parents struggling with transportation, working 2 and 3 jobs. Those problems are still there. But the money I have to address the needs of those students gets smaller and smaller every time somebody walks out the door. So we've got to figure out what this chicken and egg thing is going to be and which one we're going to be. Are we gonna be the chicken or are we gonna be the egg? We've gotta say, I ain't going nowhere, and this is what you're gonna do. I'm not leaving my building, and this is what you're gonna do. I'm not leaving my building, but I wanna see these scores get better. I'm not leaving my building, and I wanna see community achieves in my building. I'm not leaving here, and I don't want this principal, because this principal doesn't care about my kids. I want a different principal. I don't want this teacher, because this teacher sits in here on her cell phone, and I don't make none of this up. This teacher sitting on her cell phone, when a parent walks in to see how her child is doing, teacher doesn't even look up. But this is the teacher that you let stay in my school. I'm not leaving my building, but you're gonna do right by my kids. If we choose to leave, that's all the excuse the system needs not to do right, because I take the money. I take the money. Stay and fight the fight. They count on us. The whole charter movement is counting on us to look at the new shiny thing. And I'm not saying they don't do good work, but they got it down to a science. They got 15 kids in a darn class and 2 teachers for math and 2 teachers for literacy. Fight, that's the demands. That's the demands.
I appreciate your comment, and I appreciate all the information and the different views and things that we have had, that have been discussed here. And you certainly have explained a lot more things, given us a lot of information. I have 2 concerns. Number one, you talked about the kids at Whites Creek, and I read, like you said, that there are 40 students who are in this middle, who have partnering with Nashville State, I believe, and they're getting scholarships by Pinnacle. Will that, is that just for 1 year or for how many? It's continuous?
Forever and ever,
Forever.
amen.
Okay,
As long as we can
perpetuity.
get students to keep coming and
Okay.
support the program.
Now, my other concern is, what about, I think that's great. Okay. What about the other kids? Because that's 40 students. And I would assume, and maybe I'm wrong, that these are kids who have better grades. Am I? Not necessarily. Okay. Then the other thing, I talked to you about this before, have they, at the last minute meeting, I don't know if you remember or not, has the principal decided to discontinue the Cambridge program at Whites Creek?
I think we're doing AP courses. We're doing the dual college, and I don't think we're doing Cambridge at Whites Creek.
Okay. And then there were some of us, I think what we're hearing is that we'd like perhaps maybe the principal to come and tell us what different programs that are there that are unique.
He is extremely approachable, very amenable. He will I'll tell him, I'll text him right now before I walk out this door.
And there were some of us who, maybe last year before last, were very concerned about things, and we had just kind of gotten together and thought about we just sort of brainstormed and thought about maybe some courses and so forth that Whites Creek could offer that no other school offered, and that might be a drawing card. The other thing is we've talked.
I just want to say before I forget, that's the purpose of the Nashville State program. No other school has that.
Right.
That's our draw.
Right. And it could be, because I talked about this, the culinary school, there are some high schools that have it, some that don't, and maybe putting cosmetology back over there, maybe putting culinary back over there. It just, just whatever, but we just need to brainstorm and see what we can do about that. The other thing is we've talked about being advocates. So maybe we need to decide right now what we're going to do, because if you look at the current events, what's going on in the country today, the vocal minority are the ones who are heard. You've heard that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. That's exactly what happens. And so if we can make a commitment, or if somebody can guide us as to what we can do, because we can stand strong and demand things for our community, because we have to be together. We can't be divided. And where do we go from here?
And I appreciate it. I think that's what Dr. Glatt was referring to, is coming up with a strategy.
Right.
And this is something else that someone else in this room can tell you about. We love having secret meetings as a community and talking about we're going to come up with an agenda. And then we don't ever have an agenda when we leave. We never have one, right? I've been invited to meetings where they would ask me to leave my cell phone at the door and pat me down and make sure I ain't tweeting about what they're talking about, and we still don't have an agenda. We don't have an agenda, and that's what we need. And I think maybe the Bordeaux Chamber can help or be a part of that. I know they started that work and started those kinds of conversations on an agenda for Bordeaux, but it has to be, if there's to be a District 1 agenda, you're right, it has to be unified, right? Because the other thing that they count on is plucking off just one person. And we got one on the board, just plucking off one person and swimming in the opposite direction of everything else that's going. And so, yeah. Yes. Yeah, so like I said, I just this week got the typed up spreadsheet, and I can work with Glad, because Glad's got a good communication system with the platform that he uses, and just come back together. Talk about Lillard, what the options are, and it may be the first meeting we be very clear about what we don't want. That may be the only thing we decide, is what is it we don't want, and what are the viable options, and I can't say it enough, that we're willing to support. That we're willing to support. And so, yeah, so that's the next meeting and next conversation. But yeah, use that same list to bring people together to say, what's the larger conversation about District 1?
Well, Sister Gina, we are getting ready
to put us out. He about to put us out. You want me to say it?
I'm not going to put anybody out. You can hang out as long as you want, but the meeting was supposed to last until 7:30, and I know we're all passionate about these issues, and we could talk on and on and on about what to do. At a certain point, somebody's going to take leadership and help us to get together a strategy on what we can do about the schools, as well as not just the schools, but as well as the development that we want to see happen, and that's it. And so we all need to work together to make sure that we can bring people to the table to advocate for what we want. If I cut the air down, it's going to get hot, right? Yeah, I said I'm trying to be safe too. Now, I have one announcement, and this is something that you might can just tell us if it's something that we should go to or not. But Nashville Propel is co-hosting a meeting. It's for the Tennessee School Funding Review, and it's a public town hall meeting on next Wednesday, October 27th. It's from 5:30 p.m. until, and it's at the Merrill Hyde Magnet School in Hendersonville. So that's 128 Township Drive in Hendersonville, Tennessee. And so it's called Merrill Hyde Magnet School. Merrol, Hyde, Hyde. That's the Maryland, D.C. accent coming through. I apologize.
So Propel is having a meeting to talk about.
They are co-hosting a meeting.
With who?
There are folks from the state that will be there.
Okay, that's all. Yeah. So there's somebody
Yes.
from the state, then yeah, you should go.
Yes. Okay, and so I told them I'll make the announcement this evening, and if you need more information, I will send you the link to the video so that you can pull it up from there. But it's at Merrill Hyde Magnet School in Hendersonville. All right? So I thank you all. Jonathan, did you have anything else?
One other announcement really quickly. We found out a lot of people's been getting emails, but it's been going into their spam. So we need to go back and adjust the settings. Randy, did you want to?
If you do find those emails in your spam folder, make sure you scroll down to the bottom of the newsletter and it says add to your contact book, add to your address book, then it should go to your inbox. But also, if you want to give more input about redistricting during this time, send them an email at redistricting@nashville.gov. And if you go to redistricting.nashville.gov, it'll give you all the dates and virtual meeting options to voice your opinion, because now is the time to say what you need to say. And if you don't email them, you're not going to be heard. Next Thursday's date? 28th is at the where? At the Bordeaux Library. Wednesday. Go to redistricting.nashville.gov and you will see all the dates and locations.
Thank you all. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. We appreciate you. We'll see you next time.